Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now, the characteristics of local vary substantially in cultural terms. If you take up a group of workers from a particular region or a particular state, for instance, what they have or the kind of differences which they have will be different, and therefore different regional labor from different states or cultural zones vary in terms of their cultural characteristics. If you take up people from Maharashtra, within Maharashtra itself, you will have how many zones are there generally recognized in Maharashtra? You also have Vidarbha. What else? Marathwada. Okay, Vidarbha, Marathwada are the other two places which are considered important. Now, each one is supposed to have, or it does have, a cultural zone, and they vary in terms of the different characteristics which are there. And then if you look at it from the point of view of Karnataka, for instance, the regional differences in Karnataka are quite a few. This is intra-state differences. If you look at the interstate differences, for instance, what happens in Kerala and an adjacent state like Tamil Nadu, that in itself will show you some other things because of the cultural zones which are there. And then labor movement cannot be analyzed ignoring the specificity of these groups. Each group may have a particular kind of a specificity, and can we address that? And the problem which comes up here is that when you talk about nation state in certain other contexts, it's possible to conceive of a nation state, but in India it's very difficult to talk about that. Therefore, some of the scholars, political scientists, historians and the others have argued that India is a nation of nations and of nationalities, and depends on what is your definition of a nation and a nationality. And if we accept the fact that India has different nations within the nation and India has different nationalities, let me give you an example, say for instance from Pakistan. Does anybody know what are the different nationalities of Pakistan officially recognized? Yes, Punjab. Okay. Pakhtunistan or Northwest Frontier, okay, and then you have Sindh. So these are the four officially recognized nationalities, and they use the word Qaum to talk about themselves. Okay, Qaum as a nation, the nearest equivalent which you can take from the Farsi or Urdu word for Qaum is a nation. Therefore, officially, and then one of the problems which comes up there is that there is a group of people called the Muhajirs. Who are the Muhajirs? Those who migrated from India to Pakistan, and they had so far earlier what is known as the MQM, Muhajir Qawmi movement, which has been changed to Muttahida Qawmi movement. Officially, they recognize themselves as four nationalities, and it is the Muhajirs who are not given importance, and therefore they say that they should be recognized as the fifth nation. So that's an example of what you mean by nationalities. And if we look at it in India, for instance, we have far more of these nationalities compared to Pakistan. And therefore, my argument, and I have written about it, and it's in publication, is that when we look at India from the point of view of different nationalities, the preamble to the constitution, which is of course one of the most discussed or one of the most used things which is happening today, is that we talk about the peoples of India rather than the people of India. So that's one of the arguments which you can make when you are saying that it's a multiplicity. And then in a place where this kind of multiplicity or complexity comes in, it's difficult to conceive of organizing the people. It may happen, but then it's difficult. And therefore, the class factor sometimes can bring people together because they are from the same class background, but sometimes it gets muddled, or it becomes more difficult for the class organization to come in because of the fact that they belong to different kinds of groups. So this happens in many places, and India is not an exception on that. But then before that, yeah, any clarifications, questions on what we have discussed so far? Any issues? Yes, madam.
Sir, about the agricultural movement in India, I would like to know the role of All India Kisan Sabha.
Sorry, say that again.
About the agricultural movement in India, and I would like to know the role of All India Kisan Sabha.
Yes.
Because you were saying that concerning the labor movements.
Yes. No, but the All India Kisan Sabha, for instance, cannot be taken up as an equivalent of a trade union which can be there in any particular kind of industry or any other place. It's a loose kind of a conglomeration which is there as a kind of an umbrella thing, but then very rare, except for one or two occasions during the last 1 or 2 years when there has been this huge march of the peasants, or the farmers going into Bombay and Delhi kind of a thing. Otherwise, we don't have that. But then it's very difficult to bring in that kind of a thing because there's so many different parts which are there within that whole, which is there, are so disparate, so diverse, that organizing them to the extent of bringing them together is difficult on the one hand. The other thing is, given the vastness of the area which is there, mobilizing people hasn't happened so easily. And therefore, you have agricultural movements. For instance, this person called Nanjunda, who was there in Karnataka, who professor, I think he was a professor somewhere in a college probably. He had brought up quite a few people together in Karnataka, and then all of them started wearing the green pagdi or whatever, and then these kind of movements have been there. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen at all, but then given the diversity of India, things are more difficult to organize them the way you would do when it's only the class factor to be taken into consideration, and caste does not dilute or caste does not vitiate the atmosphere as it happens here.
Sir, can you explain the role of the population explosion on the declining of agricultural labor?
I am not very sure on that. Therefore, I have a very ambivalent kind of position on that, whether population affects or not. So sometimes the argument is that better utilization of the resources could be one of the reasons, and therefore can we always blame the population explosion itself to happen? Because gradually, I think all places, Kerala is of course one of the best examples which are there, which is there. Population decline has been there, but then one of the problems which comes up in this kind of a decline is that when population or fertility goes down over a period, it so happens that along with the fertility going down, there are better medical facilities, and also there are better opportunities for people to go for medical centers and other things. Therefore, what happens is, while infant mortality may go down because of better health, okay, and then mortality itself will also go down. Therefore, during the development phase, what happens is, as a result of low infant mortality happening, low adult mortality happening, there is a kind of an increase which is there in population. But at a certain level, when when things start getting stabilization, then you find the results of the population thing. But then, to answer your question straight away, if overpopulation is the result, is the reason for unemployment, I am not sure. I don't think we can give a very positive kind of an answer to that unemployment is there because of overpopulation. Yeah, anybody else who wants to say anything on this? How many of you are convinced that unemployment is a result of population explosion? Okay, any other question, query, or? The first part was just to see as to what happens or what's happening in labor, and then the second one would be more specific to where I have been involved in some small ways in some studies, and that has to do with plantations and plantation labor. We will discuss that, and hope there will be more interaction on what we are going to do in the second part. Yeah. The definition which we have is that plantation is defined in terms of an extent which is there. We will go to that. But then a large scale estate meant for farming that specializes in cash crops. That's the accent is on cash crops here. And you have plantations which are there for different kinds of things. Crops that are grown include coffee, tea, cocoa, rubber trees, and forest trees. And by forest trees, I mean sometimes you have for, say, teak. You can have a teak plantation, for instance. So those kind of things which are there. And the idea is that these are things where the cash comes in or the cash flow happens easily, and you find plantations in many places, of course, in different places. And the definition that we have, a rough kind of a definition would be that anything which is 25 acres or more and which has employed at least 30 persons on any given day during the last 12 months. So these are the two factors which are taken into consideration, and in general, irrespective of what you are growing, I think this is accepted as the definition: 25 acres, 30 persons. Now, one of the most interesting things is that there is no land ceiling which applies to plantations. Land Ceiling Act itself is different from in different states, and also depending on the productivity or the nature of land, the ceiling is there. And many states have gone in for land ceiling, and the whole general term which was used for that was the land reforms. So as a result of land reforms, land ceiling has come in. Does anybody have an idea which was the first state in the country, regarded as the first state in the country to go in for land reforms? Sorry? What is the other answers? You are right. Not many people would know this. Jammu and Kashmir was one of the first, I think 1953? I think 1953, which went in for land reforms. But Kerala and West Bengal are regarded as the ones which are supposed to be more successful in land reforms. But Jammu and Kashmir, most people believe, I think it's true, in fact, that as early as 1953, they had gone in for land reforms. And as a result of land reforms, what has happened is that the extra land was given to the tillers, and in different places it has taken different kind of forms. Tamil Nadu has got a different kind of a thing, so it varies from place to place. But the basic point to be emphasized here is that a plantation can be of any number of acres, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and then doesn't matter. Land ceiling does not apply. And one of the reasons which is given for that is that fragmentation should not happen, and that's why the question of ceiling should not come into a plantation. Now, in general, you will find this when you go through the readings that I have given in some place or the other as to what happens in plantations. And I gave you I referred to the work of Sharid Bhaumik. He is one of the persons who has done a lot of work on tea plantations and plantations in general, mostly in West Bengal. And he first taught in North Bengal in Siliguri. After that, he was at the Delhi School of Economics. From there, he moved to Bombay University. Then, before he died, he was with Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and he was the dean for labor and the other kind of studies, labor studies and the other kind of centers which they had at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So his work is quite important, and even if you just look at the EPW articles besides the other ones, you'll find a whole lot of work by Bhaumik there. And he starts talking about the genesis of plantations in different places, and he talks about how three things were very important, or three things happened in a very important way when it comes to plantations. And one was coercion, that is force, low wages, and immigrant labor. He says that if you're talking about plantations, these are the inseparable components which are there in the plantation system: coercion, low wages, and immigrant labor. In the plantations in Tamil Nadu, for instance, you may not have much of an immigrant labor, but in general, if you take up the other two states, for instance, Assam and Bengal, the whole tea plantation labor which is there in Assam and Bengal is not native to the place. They were taken in from Chota Nagpur and the other places, a whole lot of tribals, but different kinds of techniques during the colonial period. And in other places, of course, outside the country, if you look at plantations, you had what is known as the slave labor first. And the slave labor, when so-called abolition, in quotes, abolition of slave labor happened, they developed the other kind of thing called the indenture. And all these places, in general, the rule was, or the thing was, that they were all immigrant labor, and the wages were low, and there was a lot of force on the people who were there. And because of low wages and keeping a number of people around without much of liberty given to them, which could be there in other sectors, the planters made high profits. All plantation systems in general yielded high profits. And any time, and for years together, there was no reforms, and for years together, wages were not increased in most of the plantations, initially at least, before some kind of an organization has happened. In a labor intensive industry, once you reduce the wage, the profits are very high. And that's one of the things which is practiced by people when they want to go in for a high thing. There is a lot of labor. Even if you reduce 1 rupee, then it means a lot in terms of the volume of labor which is there. Therefore, in any place where there is labor intensive thing, they try to keep the wages as low as possible. And it was in plantations most of the time, there was a captive labor, and they could exact as much of work as possible from the laborers, because the official number of hours that they had to work at, which happened much later. Earlier, sometimes they worked for 16 hours or as long as or sometimes more than that, and therefore 12 hours still happens in many places in the plantations, but then gradually the whole thing, because of trade unionism and other things, it's supposed to be getting reduced. But then what happens is that the plantations sometimes are so far away that some of the things which happen don't come to light very easily. And therefore, the plantations have a different kind of, the nature of the plantations itself is a very different kind of thing which is there, and the outside world does not come to know much of it. The socio-economic formation of the plantation with this low level of technology and heavy dependence on manual labor is significantly different from other industries. The reason why the word industries is used here is because plantations are supposed to be industries, and that's why if you compare to any industry, for instance, where industry basically gives you the feeling or the idea that there was technology involved and a high level of technology involved in that. And here it didn't happen to that extent, or very low. In fact, there's hardly any technology was involved in most of the plantations which is there, and therefore dependence on manual labor is significantly different, and you cannot compare that with any industry at all. So the plantations have a completely different kind of set of, it's a different kind of organization altogether, compared with the other things which are there, and therefore it's always said that though it's an industry, is a completely different kind of industry. And the plantations, because it's an industry, they're supposed to be organized, to be in the organized sector and remain one of the most excluded and marginalized sections of the society even today. People who have been working on plantations have always felt that the people who work there are very marginalized. And if you take up the tea thing, for instance, Assam is the one which has the highest, which production also is high, and then highest number of labor which is there is in Assam. And one of the most interesting thing is that they are known as tea tribes in Assam, but then they don't have the tribal status. That's one of the interesting features which are there. And the others who are there, like the Bodos and the others, don't want the tea labor in Assam to get the tribal status. Therefore, on the one hand, even if the state wants to give them some kind of concession, the others go against it. And therefore, if some of you have been following what has happened in Assam, not now, for quite a few years, you find that there's a lot of violence against these people. And those who have got a tribal status, like the Bodos and the others, don't want the others to share anything, and don't want them to share any part of the cake which goes in the tribal kind of a thing. And this has been one of the most disturbing kind of a feature which has happened. And for me, it was quite interesting to be there, as well as disturbing to be there for about 4 years in Assam, when you could see these things on a daily basis as to what happens. And then in Assam, somebody or the other goes for a bandh or a strike. It can happen every week, and nobody knows when it will happen. And many times you are stranded for about 10 to 12 hours in the place where you are there if you are traveling, or you can't travel. You can't. Therefore, Assam has been one of the most disturbed kind of a places, and also because of the other thing which is there now, that it's not just a question of tribal and non-tribal, also a question of a migrant and a non-migrant, and within migrant and non-migrant, the question of Bangladeshis comes up there, and also the aspect of Muslim comes in a big way. And the last NC, National Register of Citizens, which was there, has shown that there are 19 lakh people have been disenfranchised or not included, and the non-citizens who are there. And what happens, we don't know. But the whole thing gets written into it, because some of them are labor of different kinds, and the tea labor is a different kind of a thing altogether. The complete system which is there is that in the tea plantations, there have been people for nearly 4 generations, 5 generations, all of them, none of them is indigenous, and everybody is poor. They don't have any privileges, but they're not given the tribal status. So it's a very disturbing kind of a thing which happens. And plantation is the exclusive social system of the laborers, particularly in tea. What do I mean when I say that is the exclusive social system of the laborers? When you say a plantation is the exclusive social system, what does it mean? And are there any advantages of that, or are there any disadvantages of such a system? What are the implications?
So definitely there are no advantages, because they are bound to stay there, and mostly the plantation workers, they stay in the coolie lines within the plantations, and also that is also being controlled by the management, where there will be a watchman be appointed. I don't know presently if a watchman is appointed, but before, during the when the plantation systems came into being, definitely there was a watchman appointed in order to prevent the workers from escaping the plantations.
Yes.
So, and also this the planters before in 1947, they don't want any outsiders in order to interfere with the tea production process and all, because that might hamper, and also will also lead to a decrease in their profits.
Yes.
So definitely being in a plantation, the workers are in a very what do you say,
excluded and isolated. In fact, yes, that's right. No life outside. They're just confined to the plantation. Almost everyone who is there, and there have been places, there have been plantations where coming to know that they have been for 3-4 generations is not uncommon, both in Assam as well as in other places. So there is no life outside. Almost everyone is born there, grows up there, and dies in the confines of a plantation. Their progeny too does the same thing. They go through the same kind of process which is there, and very little or almost nothing sometimes to do with the outside world. They are just completely isolated in the plantations, and then neighboring areas are deliberately undeveloped. This is one of the things which happens uniformly all across. Wherever there are plantations, the nearby areas are not developed. And the idea is that any other employment avenue for somebody who wants to leave does not exist. And if the parents are entrenched in the place, the children do not have much of an opportunity for many of the things which happen to people who are not part of a plantation system, but who are labor all the same. So this is something which is completely different and very unique. And if somebody wants to get out, there's not much of a chance. And as Amil was mentioning, there were so many restrictions. Some of these have been relaxed now, and there was a complete watch system where nobody could move out. That's one, and nobody from outside was allowed to come into many of the plantations. And it's very guarded kind of a place, completely isolated and exclusive kind of habitats which were there only for these people, and nobody else could interact with them. And sometimes they had to work all the 7 days without any kind of a break. Today, because of the, we will come to that, certain things which have happened, certain changes have come in, but then even today they are considered as places where there is not much of a contact with the outside world, or they can't do anything even if they want to go out. The other labor, for instance, if you talk about non-plantation labor in general, they don't have those kind of restrictions. Other labor, particularly in urban areas, has a life outside of the work area. They can get out to an extent of the clutches and control of the owners and management. Once they leave the workplace, they're independent to do certain things. But then on the plantations, your social life, your cultural life, and anything else that you might want to have all happens in the same place. You don't have another life at all. So you are bound by the plantation system. You get up there, go for work, then come back to the plantations itself. Whereas people who are working in urban areas or any other kind of a sector have got a dual life, in quotes, dual life, in the sense that your workplace is different and your living habitat and what you do during the rest of the time is different. Whereas in a plantation, you don't have that kind of a luxury or that kind of liberty at all. You just are there, you are part of the thing, and there's very little that you can do in terms of going out or meeting with other people or something. It just doesn't happen. And this has been one of the most restrictive kind of a thing which can happen to anybody or anybody else anywhere. Now, the plantation labor, for instance, if you take up tea first, tea is produced mainly in the 4 states, that's Assam, West Bengal, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. Now, if you look at the number of people working, it's staggering. You have about 10 lakh people working in the plantations. And this is more or less considered as the permanent people. And these are more recent figures. And this you will find in the EPW article by Virginius Khaka. That is November 2019. That's about 2-3 months back when this thing came up. These are the more recent figures which are there. And you have about 10 lakh people in the tea plantations. And then besides those 10 lakhs, there are temporary and other category of workers which is around 6 lakhs. Now, this is again amazing because in tea there's supposed to be ancillary kind of a thing which happen besides the picking itself which happens, right? What are the ancillaries? You work in the factory, okay, and then you do weeding, de-weeding, the other kind of a thing, and maintenance of the thing, clearing of the weeds. So, there are about 6 lakh people, so which makes it 10 lakh permanent and 6 lakh who are doing other kinds of jobs which are there. So, this is something which is there, and it is highly labor intensive, as we saw in the other kind of a thing, no? Highly labor intensive, which means that you have to maintain the number of people who are there, otherwise the production falls. So, they will go to any extent and any length to keep them, and because they are employed on the plantation, stay on the plantation, this is happening on a family basis. Husband works there, the wife works there, and sometimes in certain places the children also work, and sometimes they provide certain facilities to the children like the creche and the other things which are there, and sometimes even a primary kind of a schooling which is there, but in most places it doesn't happen. So, to that extent our experience has been that Kerala and Tamil Nadu are better organized in that way, but then Assam and Bengal, not to say Assam is the worst in fact that you will get, and the wages also happen to be low. So, getting people who have been working for 3 generations, the same kind of job, sometimes the same kind of house, the same kind of confines of space which is there, not unusual. You will find it happening quite often, and this does not happen in any other sector. No other sector you will find grandfather, father and the son doing almost similar kind of job and with very little variation of wages. Not much has happened, and the conditions of living haven't changed much in the plantations which are there. Now, almost 50% are women because husband and wife, both of them work, and therefore it's almost 50%, the number of workers that you take up. And even if children are employed, because of the sex ratio, and fortunately some of them are not going in, I think, for what the urban people do in terms of trying to determine the sex before this child is born. Therefore, you have more or less 50% happening there, except in parts of Assam, work is perennial all through the year. Why? In Tamil Nadu, Kerala and West Bengal, more or less tea production happens on 365 days, all the 365 days of the year, except in certain parts of Assam. Does anybody have an idea why it could be in certain parts of Assam that it doesn't happen? It's not perennial. Why it doesn't happen 365 days? Heavy rains, that's right. And therefore, while tea is a constant round the clock 365-day activity in all places, in certain places in Assam, certain estates, certain plantations, it doesn't happen, and therefore it's considered in quotes seasonal in those places, whereas it's round the clock in all other places. It's always there, it happens. And then you pick up tea leaves, and anybody knows how the picking, what the picking is known as? There's a controversy about that. Some say it's 2 leaves and a bud, and some say it's 3 leaves and a bud. What is your experience? You have been working in Kerala plantations? Not yet. Okay, remember this, there's a controversy about whether you pick 2 leaves and a bud or you pick 3 leaves and a bud. So, that's the kind of a thing which happen, and they're paid according to the kind of picking which they do, and therefore they have the basket at the back, and then the moment they pick, they keep putting it in the basket, and at the end of the day, they bring it to the factory, and then the whole process of drying and making the tea happens on the same day. It doesn't get delayed, and that's why it's 365 days a year, whereas in certain places it doesn't happen. And then the unique feature of tea plantation is this, that it's around the clock for the entire year. There is no other plantation which can claim to have that kind of a thing. Okay, it happens over tea is the one which happens. I don't know if anybody has visited a tea factory anywhere. You have, where? Moornad, Kerala, yeah. What do you remember?
I remember
the picking, how to pick, yeah.
And how different parts of that is used for different types of teas, like white tea, green tea, and the normal tea.
Yes.
And how the quality was determined. I can't remember because it was some time back.
Yeah.
But I have.
That's right. And that's the specialized thing, how you pick the tea. The quality of tea is determined by the kind of picking which happens. So it's very specialized kind of a thing which happens, and those who go to the plantations will in fact be quite amazed that they have such nimble fingers which they do, and they do very quickly because their whole wage sometimes depends on how much of picking they do. And though there's supposed to be a daily wage, there's a very complicated kind of a thing which happens. Now, ecologically, the least damaging to the environment is coffee. Why? If you take up any other plantation, there is clear felling which happens first. Tea, rubber, okay, even if you say banana or coconut or areca, whatever, first thing they do is clear felling of the forest completely. And then after that, they plant whatever you want, tea or rubber or whatever. And for tea, sometimes they put in silver oak or something else as a shade tree sporadically. But that's a monoculture kind of a thing again. Tea itself is a monoculture in any way. Therefore, the clear felling which happens in other plantations does not happen in tea, in coffee, and therefore it's considered as least damaging to the ecology and environment of a place, because about 50% of the original tree cover is retained as shade for coffee plantations. And those of you who have seen coffee plantations will know that the coffee plantations look so different. Anybody who has seen any coffee plantation anywhere? You have, again, Murnad, somewhere near there? Where?
My grandparents have a small, it's not a large plant.
Doesn't matter. We won't hold you responsible for the labor suffering.
The labor is, but it's done by both of them only, so it's just
Okay.
a small.
They have some tree cover.
Yeah, all the other trees are actually retained, jackfruit, mango, all of
Yes.
them are there. And
Sometimes teak and sometimes ebony, sometimes you have rose.
yeah.
Yeah.
So coffee plants are just in between.
Yes.
It's not like organized in lines.
That's right. Yeah. That's where, which part of Kerala?
This is Kottayam district.
Kottayam district. Yeah. Where did you see the coffee plantation? While traveling. Okay. Anybody who has been to Coorg? Sorry? Wayanad. Yeah, you have seen some coffee plantation. You saw a lot of trees around, no? No clear felling. Yeah. No clear felling. Yeah, that's, yeah. Where did you see? Coorg, which place in Coorg?
It was on the way to Madikeri.
Madikeri is the capital, right? Yeah. Yeah. Where did you go from?
I went from Mysore.
Mysore to Madikeri. Yeah, you don't find much between Mysore and Madikeri. Yeah, but then did you actually get down and go to a coffee plantation?
Yeah.
You went? Which place?
My batchmate was having a coffee plantation.
Where? Which place? Do you remember?
It was on the way to King's Seat,
Raja's Seat.
Raja's Seat.
That's Raja's Seat is in Madikeri, but Madikeri itself is an urban place. It's the capital of the district.
On the way.
Okay. So you have seen. Okay. A lot of shade trees were there.
Yeah, there were shade trees.
Yes. You don't do clear felling, and that's why I think coffee is considered. Now this is the, the coffee beans which people pick and kept here. So the original tree cover is retained, and then the other thing which is which happens in coffee plantations is that sometimes they plant orange trees as extra thing, and then pepper is there, and you also have cardamom. Cocoa is a separate kind of a thing. It's not planted along with coffee. It's done separately in a separate plantations. Okay. So these are the people who are sorting the coffee beans which are there. Now, in coffee, about 6.6 lakh workers are employed in the coffee plantation sector in the country. But then most of the coffee comes from South India itself. and Kerala has got some, Tamil Nadu has got some, but Karnataka is the one which leads. And in the northeast, you have sporadic kind of places, but then almost negligible kind of a thing. But then 78% are employed in Karnataka alone, and within that, Coorg or Kodagu accounts for 2.65 lakh people. Now, besides Coorg, the other places where you have coffee in Karnataka is two other districts, Hassan and Chikmagalur. The coffee picking, which is done mostly by women, and therefore in coffee plantations, the number of women who are there, or the percentage of women who are there is much higher than in tea. In tea, you have 50%, but then in Karnataka alone, 61% of the workforce, women are the workforce in this. Now, Coorg is something very peculiar, because Coorg coffee was introduced in 1850, around 1854. Till 1834, Coorg was a separate state by itself, in the sense that it was ruled by the Lingayat Rajas. And in 1834, the British annexed one of the last parts to fall to the British. They unseated the last Raja called Veera Raja, and then they took over Coorg. And 1834 onwards, Coorg was with the British. And around 1850, they found that this would be an ideal kind of a place to go for coffee plantations, and around 1850. Meanwhile, Chikmagalur already had coffee. So, Chikmagalur was the first place in India to get coffee, in fact. And then from there, it spread to Coorg, and they started clearing up parts of the forest for the cultivation of coffee. And from 1850-54 onwards, coffee picked up in a big way, but all the initial planters who were there were British. And gradually, the local people, the Coorgs or the Kodwa community, also got interested, and then they started going in for coffee plantation. But that was the time, 1850s, when the first coffee plantation started in Coorg, and it picked up in a very, very big way. And if you are looking for tea, Coorg is not the place. There is only one big tea plantation in Coorg, in South Coorg, at a place called Hudikeri, and Tatas own that. It is known as the Glenlorna Tea Estate. Rest all is coffee, entire district. So, in one place, on the way to Mangalore from Madkeri or Markera, there is a place called Sampaje where rubber has been planted. But then tea in one place, rubber in one place, rest of the district is full of coffee. Now, coffee plantation can be categorized, I mean the coffee plantation labor, there is three kinds. Unlike tea, where there is a perennial 365 days, same number of labor, coffee has a different kind of a thing. So, you have what is known as, out of the three, first one is the regular workers, who are not too many, but then they are there. They live on the plantations with their families in what are known as line houses. Line houses is like the coolie lines that you talk about, or the labor lines which are there. So, some permanent workers are always there. They are known as the regular workers. So, they are paid daily wages and basic amenities, sometimes some ration and other things are given to them, but they are there. And some of them earlier were known as the bonded labor, because they didn't have any opportunity to leave and go out. And those of you who have read anything on Coorg will find that bonded labor was one of the things which happened in the plantations of Coorg during the time of the Rajas, and also subsequently even during the time of the British, and it has continued in many places, because some of the regular people who are there in some of the coffee plantations in Coorg, they have been again there for 3 to 4 generations. And then you have the casual workers who are recruited during the peak work for short period. Now, unlike tea, coffee has got a peak period, and peak period in coffee means the time when you do the beans are collected from the thing. So, coffee picking season, what is known as the picking season, which is there. And during the picking season, they have casual workers which are brought in to do some small kind of a work. And then there are what are known as the seasonal workers who come in and hired on a contract basis during the weeding and picking seasons again. Now, this seasonal labor is very interesting in coffee plantations. Many of them come from nearby dry areas of Karnataka, and sometimes there are people from outside too. But it's amazing that the number of workers who are required during the seasonal workers who are required during the picking season is unimaginable compared to the regular workers who are there. And that goes to the extent of 300%. Suppose you have 50 people working on a daily basis. During the picking season, you will need 150 extra people to come in coffee. And this is where there are contract systems or the Kangani and the other thing which operates. We don't have to go into the details of that, but then this happens for a period of about 3 to 4 months. And that's when the picking season starts. And in Coorg all over you have 2 varieties. There is a third variety called Kaveri which they have tried, but it has not been very successful. The 2 varieties which are there are Arabica and Robusta. And in Arabica, it flowers and then the picking season starts around November, continues during December and sometimes part of January, or sometimes it gets over by December. And then the Robusta comes in slightly late, and Robusta comes in say from December to January or February. Again, this seasonal labor which is there is a very symbiotic thing for them. Many of them are landless laborers, and some of them, like I said, also have some land sometimes, but they do come in here. And there's one family I met in Chikmagalur when I was doing some field work, where a Lambani family had 10 acres of dry land. And you don't expect somebody who has got 10 acres to go in for seasonal labor during the coffee picking season. But it happened because they say that after we do our things, the crop is over, May, June or July they will have the rains, they will have something, one crop, it gets over by October, November. And then they go as seasonal labor. And when they go as seasonal workers, they work there up to February, March, then they come back, wait for the rains and then go in for one single crop which is there. So this one Lambani family I met was they had 10 acres of land. And this is an interesting kind of an anecdote about that I was interviewing this person from this family. I was doing a project for the Government of India project which was there on seasonal migration of labor, as I mentioned in the earlier thing, and Karnataka is one of the receiving states for labor. I was talking to this person and I interviewed him for about 2 hours and got different kinds of details. One of the things he said that we own land, but then there are others who don't move, and those who don't move have a very derogatory kind of a reference to the people who migrate. And he said that those of us who are seasonal migrants are looked down upon by people who don't move in our area, because they say that, and they use the Lamani term to say that you people pack up your utensils and other belongings and go from place to place. And that was one way of making them making digs at them and a derogatory kind of a thing. So this person I was interviewing for about 2.5 hours, and I didn't realize that I had made a big mistake. Can anybody guess what was the mistake? Mistake was not in interviewing itself, but there was a mistake. I came to know later that for that 2.5 hours that he spoke to me, he had lost his wages. So social scientists sometimes do their work, and whatever they do or publish, it looks good on their CV, and then people sometimes are at a disadvantage of your kind of a work. So it's a one-way street. Sometimes we make tall claims that we have done this study and other things. Sometimes the communities that we study with don't get anything at all. Sometimes some of them may lose. So I came to know later that this person had lost his wages because I was staying there in Chikmagalur for some time and doing this study, and the only thing I could do was to apologize, but then that wasn't enough. And one of the things that we have been taught in anthropological fieldwork is not to make cash payments. So that had to be avoided. So it was a very ticklish kind of an issue. And then these things, no methodology book will teach you. You learn these things while doing field work. So methodology books will tell you that it's like swimming. you get into a pool and then use your hands and legs. Unless you get into the pool, you don't know what swimming is. And that's what methodology books tell you. So there are other kinds of occasions. For instance, in Coorg, I was doing field work, and there was a person who was a retired assistant commissioner, and he was about 100 years old. And I used to meet him quite often because he was knowledgeable. I was getting good information from him. And once I had a 4-hour interview with him. He was about 100 or just about to touch 100. 4-hour interview with him. Then we had lunch. He was one of the richest persons, and his plantation was known as Bison State. So I used to go quite often to the place. So I spent about 4 hours with him, had lunch, went back. He died the same night. Okay, so the next morning, the newspapers the next day talked about a scholar who had come and spent so much of time with him, and possibly he was exhausted and he died. So what do? The other appointments and the other things that I had were all cancelled for next 10 to 15 days. No methodology book tells you what to do during that time. You experience this only when you are in the field. Okay, fine. So what we are talking about is that usually these migrant workers who are there, 300% coming in, they go back. And then sometimes the owners or the plantation owners, and there is no contact between them. There is a middle person who manages everything, gives them advance for the next year, and gets them recruited coming in for the next year. The planters don't even know how many people, I mean, who are the people who are coming, they don't have an idea. Therefore, you have to interview those people themselves. From the planter's point of view or the owner's point of view, you don't get much information as to who are the people who are coming in. Now, some are landed, like I said, with one rain-fed crops which are there. And then these people are mostly, most of this coffee plantations, the best one are from in Coorg and Hassan and Chikmagalur district. Now, if you compare the other sectors, including tea, where there is 50% women labor, coffee has got more. And this again is something which is peculiar to the coffee thing, that they include that. And sometimes it so happens that the men have certain other duties to do, and the women have been. So a kind of a division of labor may also take place because of this. But then you also find, like we saw in the other thing, about 61% of the women working in plantations were women.